There's a lot of questions to how and why Florida got this far. And one of the main reasons why, I've said it and I'll say it again. If UConn wasn't screwed in the second half of the game, maybe it's UConn in the Final Four, and they're facing off against Auburn. Now, we don't know how it would have fell, and I'm making an assessment that might, obviously a lot of people probably disagree with. But I do believe UConn was screwed in that particular game. Duke was struggling in the first 10 minutes of the game. As a matter of fact, the game was so very close. Now, Alabama really barely ever had the lead in this game. They were chasing Duke the whole game, and Duke looked like they were playing on all cylinders when I popped the game on with 10 minutes left in the first half. And what I saw Duke do in the game is they absolutely dominated with their secondary players. It wasn't Proctor. It was Knuppel. He actually had a very good game. Their bigs played very, very well. Their guard play was sensational. Cooper Flagg did not have one of his best games. He didn't. But he didn't need to. When he needed to make a block, he made a block. When he needed to hit a free throw, he hit a free throw. When he needed to make a layup, he made a layup. That's what you expect from your superstars, especially when they were double teaming him and making sure that he couldn't get into the paint, which he had problems in the game, especially in the first half of the game, and getting into the paint. But that's what makes these tournaments so interesting to watch. You need your secondary players to really step up, and Duke has a tremendous amount of talent coming off the bench and the other four guys that are playing as their starters. I was so impressed, and I will say this, and I don't usually give this guy credit. The coaching for the Duke Blue Devils and Scheyer was absolutely outstanding. I got a chance to watch Scheyer actually call a timeout in the second half with 7 minutes left. Alabama was cutting the score down, I think, at one point to 7 points. He calls a timeout because I forget who, one of the Duke guards made a mistake.
But now you're giving Scheyer credit?
I'm giving, yes. I said,
okay.
Listen, I give a coach his due when I saw something that I respect. And I'll say that about players that I don't like either. But I got to give Scheyer a lot of credit because when his team was getting into a situation where he needed to call a timeout, he called a good timeout, and he got his team back on track with 6.5 minutes left of the game. He stopped the bleeding, especially the way the Alabama Crimson Tide was shooting with the last 3 minutes. I would say 10 and a half minutes left of the game. They hit a couple of deuces and a three-pointer that cut the lead because at one point, Duke was up by about 18 with 10 minutes left, and then they cut it down at one point to 8 or 9 points. So, and that had a lot to do with Scheyer making the call, calling the timeout, and getting his team calm down and actually call back and get this team back on the defensive side of the ball. I was very impressed with Scheyer. I was very impressed with their secondary players. And I have to give Alabama a lot of credit because Alabama looked like they were completely out of the game. They didn't look like they were even were in the same conference or realm of the game with Duke. But what Duke did in the game was they showed up and they made sure Alabama worked for every single point, worked for every single defensive stop. And that's why Duke beat Alabama. But it was very, very close at the end of the game until like the last 4 minutes of the game where Duke just started to pull away. They hit a couple of threes. They went to the foul line. Alabama started to get into foul trouble. And usually once a team gets into foul trouble, you depend on your free throw shooting. Duke was really throughout the tournament. They've been the best free throwing team in this tournament. It's not even an argument.
They also did it in the first half too when Alabama pulled it close, and then obviously Cooper hits that three to kind of separate the lead for them in the first half too.
No, and you're right. And again, what Duke does so very well is when they're in trouble, they obviously use other, obviously perceiving defensive strategies, and they usually Alabama. Sears has been very, very good in this tournament. Sears was a no-show in this game. He was a no-show in this game. They had to use their secondary players to get points, and Alabama, which has been very, very good, a two-dimensional team in this tournament, they could not stop Duke's offense. They had problems with Duke all game long offensively. They couldn't stop him. And the only person they shut down, and I don't know if you shut him down because I think he had like 17, 18 points in Cooper Flagg, but they kept him to a minimum where he didn't affect them in the game the way he did affect, was it Baylor? No, it wasn't Baylor. Who was the other team they beat, Speedy, before?
It was Arizona.
Arizona, when they beat Arizona. Cooper Flagg had an all-world game. I think against Arizona, he had 28, 29 points, and he had like 3 blocks and 7, 8 rebounds, and he had like 5, 6 assists. He was unbelievable. His numbers were one of the best tournament games we've ever seen of Duke Blue Devil. As a matter of fact, I think it was the best game a Duke Blue Devil has ever had in the Elite Eight. And then there was the Houston, and Houston was sensational. And by the way, I don't hear Jamie Lee. I don't hear him speaking, because I remember Jamie Lee said to me before the tournament started that he doesn't trust Houston, that they're going to fall apart. As a matter of fact, I think everybody on their bracket didn't have Houston going past the Sweet 16. I'm pretty sure that was practically everybody. But I was probably the only one that had them going to the Final Four. And it's very well deserved. First of all, they beat a very good Tennessee team that has played as good as anybody in the nation the last 3 weeks of the season. And Tennessee went the furthest they've been in a very long time. Tennessee was sensational throughout the tournament. The problem with Tennessee in this game, they could not score. They could not score. They had bad shooting problems early in the game, and then Houston started pulling away. Houston's not a great shooting team. As a matter of fact, they're not what you say a great offensive team. They're the best defensive team in this tournament. They were the best defensive team in the nation, and they showed it in the second half. They completely shut down Tennessee's offense. Tennessee couldn't get to the hole. They tried to chuck up threes. They had problems being positioned and put in the right position to score, and you saw the game. Houston just dominated on the boards too. Houston has played as good as they have been over the last couple of weeks. And I'm going to say this right now. Houston might have lost a couple of games before. They did not have a very good tournament. Houston's been really, crawling to the finish line. And if they do that against Duke, they're not going to win. But I said this, Speedy, and I've said this over and over and over again. The only team that has a chance to beat Duke in this tournament was Houston. And I'll say it again. If there's any team that's going to knock out Duke, if Duke wins this game against Houston, they're winning the whole thing. They're winning the whole kit and caboodle. Because I don't think Auburn's going to beat them. I don't think Florida's going to beat them. And I know everybody's going to say, well, both teams are bigger than Duke. Who cares? They're not more athletic. They're not better all around defensively. And they're not better off the bench. The Duke Blue Devils have a great bench. But Tennessee just didn't show up in the game. And Houston, even though they didn't have one of their better shooting games, they didn't need to. All they needed to do was shut down a team in the first half, and everybody keeps giving Houston a lot of credit for what they did defensively in the first half. Tennessee chucked up a lot of shots. They just couldn't hit any. So it wasn't Houston's defense. It was just Tennessee started the game really soft. And as the second half came around, they got a little closer, but then fell apart with the last 5-6 minutes left of the game. And then there's Auburn and Michigan, okay? Now, Broome has been their best player, all right? He has been their best player all season long, and he got hurt early in the second half. It was the second half, right?
Yep.
I think it was early.
It was about 10 and a half minutes.
Yeah, it was early in the second half. I know he went to the back, and then he came back out with this last 6 minutes, and he swore to himself that if anything happens to him in this tournament, no matter what, he's going to go out there and play hurt. And he came back, and he made some valuable key rebounds in this game, especially the last 3 minutes of the game, and it sealed the deal against Michigan State. Now, Michigan State, they are very well coached. Tom Izzo is a great coach. We all know what Tom Izzo is all about. He's won national championships. He's coached some of the best NBA players in the past. Draymond Green knows a little bit about Tom Izzo. And Auburn is coached by a coach that's never gotten to the Final Four. As a matter of fact, he's never gotten to the championship game. So now he has a chance to win and go to the dance, go to the championship against either Duke or Houston, but he's got to go through Florida. Florida, to me, they shouldn't be here. They shouldn't be here, but it doesn't matter. They're a number one seed. They earn the right to get into the position that they're in, and they won their game. They won their Elite Eight, their Elite Eight game fairly. They have shown. I would say they've shown enough to say that they should be here in the Final Four. I just don't know if they're one of the three top teams. I think, to me, everybody keeps saying Duke's the favorite. Then, obviously, what is it? It goes Duke is the favorite to win this right here. Auburn, Duke, Houston. Who's the favorite? Duke's the favorite to
It's
win.
Florida second, then Auburn, then
I
Houston.
disagree.
Auburn, then Houston.
I think it's Duke, Auburn, Houston, Florida. And the fact that they have Florida there, obviously because of what they've done all season long, but Florida, again, they inched their way into the Final Four. It was well deserved in the game that they had in the Elite Eight, but they shouldn't have been here. I think UConn, Maryland, I could have beaten them. I just think Maryland didn't show up in the game, and that's why Florida obviously is going to the Final Four. But all these teams deserve it, and I said this before the tournament started. I said that I wouldn't be surprised if all the number one teams go to the Final Four this year. And everybody thought I was crazy. 17 years that it's been where all the number one teams have went. I just think the one team that shouldn't be there is Florida. But again, it doesn't really matter. They all got to show up. And any given day in a basketball game where you're only playing one game, you're not playing a 7-game series, you're not playing a 3-game series, you're not playing a 5-game series, you're playing one game. If one team has a bad shooting day or one team cannot stop their team's best player, they're out. They're going to be knocked out. So it's going to be very, very close. It's going to be fun to watch. And obviously, these Final Four games are always interesting. And I expect Florida to put up their best game against Auburn, as well as I think Auburn will. And Duke, I expect them to beat Houston. But again, Houston scares me the way they play defense and their perimeter defense. They're going to force Duke to get into the paint. And again, Houston is a team that wants you to go into the paint because they got two guys that can absolutely deflect the ball and put you in a position where you're going to foul.